Thank you, Liv. This is our fifth webinar in a monthly series. It's kind of a lunch and learn, 1 hour. Today, we're going to talk about housing, the title Housing Re-localized, and I'm going to get into that more. I'm Robert Cervelli. I'm the Senior Advisor for Center for Local Prosperity. We've got Andy Horsnell, the Executive Director, on the call, and Liv Langell, Program Manager. She's going to be our tech support for the next hour. If you're not familiar with the Center for Local Prosperity, we are a charity nonprofit. We operate across the whole of Atlantic Canada, and our mandate is to empower small, local, and rural communities so that they have more agency over their future. So that's how do you meet your needs, local needs being met locally. So in some of the past webinars in this series, we looked at localizing investment, we looked at business co-ops, we looked at localizing energy with some of the locally owned electrical utilities. And today we're going to talk about housing. Housing, I think, as we all know, is a huge subject. A huge subject. It's getting bigger, of course, all the time with homelessness, lack of affordability, and so on. So we hope to shed a little bit of light, provide some insight into the housing and what might be some innovative alternatives. There's been a thread, I want to say right at the beginning, through all of these webinars that we've done, and it's been all around cooperation. So whether it's local investment, business co-ops, energy utilities, what everyone's finding is cooperation is the key. It builds critical mass, it builds expertise, capacity, investment capacity, all of the above. So that thread continues as we'll be talking about the housing market here. So I'd like to introduce, we're very fortunate to have an excellent panel here today, and I would like to introduce each of them. We have Lynn Jones, who is in Truro. Thank you for joining us, Lynn. She will be representing land trusts, and she is on the board. She's a founder and chair of the DownTheMarsh Community Land Trust in Truro. But even more than that, Lynn is a human rights advocate, a community historian. There's a large collection of archival works on African Canadian and diaspora heritage at the St. Mary's University, and she's a recipient of the Order of Canada. So thank you for joining us today, Lynn. We've also got Lori Cook. She'll be representing the cooperative housing model. She's a development coach, educator, researcher, extremely active person, I must say. Executive Director of Housing Innovation Cooperative. She's on the board of the Compass Nova Scotia Housing Cooperative and co-chair of the Nova Scotia Nonprofit Housing Association. Thank you.
Just to clarify, the Nova Scotia Nonprofit Housing Association HRM Rural Network, just because I think Trish is on here somewhere. So I just want to be clear about that.
Thank you for that. And then also we've got Mark Kennedy. Mark is going to be bringing to us a very innovative new approach. I've heard it called mixed market financing for doing affordable housing. This would be non-market housing. He's the founder and CEO of Everbloom Homes, CIC. That designation, a community interest company. It's a relatively new category of companies in Nova Scotia, the first ones really in all of Canada. And it's best described, I think, as a hybrid between a profit and a nonprofit with a social purpose. So that's going to be quite interesting to see how we can get financing around some affordable housing. So I think with that, I'd like to get underway. I want to ask people to put your questions in the chat box. Liv will be monitoring that. There will be about a 20-minute period at the end where we can do some Q&A. But first, I think I'd like to open it up to you, Lynn. If you could tell us about community land trusts.
Wow. Hello, everyone. And first of all, let me thank the Center for Local Prosperity for inviting all of us today. And I'm especially excited to be on this panel with my co-panelists because we've never presented together before. So that's a first for us. And I'm excited with all the people out there that are going to be part of this because I know you're going to have tons and tons of questions for us. And we'll have to speak very little up top. So they've given us just a few minutes to explain what we do and where we come from. And I always like to talk about community land trust because people aren't that familiar with them. So just to give you a bit of history, that they were actually founded um, in the 60s. That's in my time. I know many of you weren't even born then. As a post-civil rights movement initiative. And when I started out, I had no idea at all that it started within the Black community, the first community land trust in the United States. And that made it all more exciting that we were doing a community land trust in Truro, Nova Scotia, within the Black community. So they started out very slowly, this whole idea. And it's not the same as land trust that you see where they have these protected nature kind of things. It's community land trust. So that's the operative words there. And in the late 60s, came out of the civil rights movement. And that original land trust is still in existence today. I think it was 1969. And when they first started, they were really, really, really slow to develop. And you can imagine because community land trusts were totally different than what we were used to, where your land actually became in the hands of communities. So the land is forever, in perpetuity, owned by the community. But the structures on the land, which is the housing or whatever you're putting on the land, actually can be owned by individuals or corporations or different people. But the operative word is the land is owned. You lease the land, and as a part of that, we're able to make the land as low cost, low income families forever can be a part of having their own homes. Imagine that. And below market value is what you're able to secure your housing for. So that is quite exciting for people to say that they can actually own this land in the community land trust. So go ahead.
That's great, Lynn. Thank you. We're going to come back and we want to explore that some more. We're going to come back. And I do want to throw in quickly that we've been members of the E.F. Schumacher Society, and Robert Swan, I think, was one of the people from there that helped set up those land trusts way back in the late 60s.
Really?
Yeah. And we have continued to have Susan Witt on our
Yes, I am, but it's okay.
Right.
So I would like to ask people to go on mute. Thank you.
Hopefully in the chat they'll have more questions because I really didn't get to explain.
Okay. No, we will come back. Lori, I'd like to give you 5 minutes as well to talk about cooperative housing.
Yeah, so I've been doing some thinking about this because it's a kind of a big topic. And for instance, community land trusts are often cooperatives of some kind. And an eco village I visited in New York last year, that's how they started, is they had a community land trust that was a nonprofit cooperative. And then they developed 3 separate housing co-ops that were equity-based housing co-ops, which we don't hear a lot about in especially in Eastern Canada, that then leased land from the community land trust. And one of those more recent equity housing co-ops also included rental housing. So when we hear about housing co-ops, we hear often about nonprofit housing cooperatives. And the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada is actually mainly is all about nonprofits. Like, it doesn't include equity-based co-ops. There are a few equity-based housing co-ops out in British Columbia. And just to explain the difference, nonprofit means there's no profit going to shareholders of the housing co-op. They're basically renting according to whatever the fees are that are set by the co-op. And that's a very common form. But there is also equity-based, which in the example in New York and some others I've seen is usually you own shares in the co-op that usually correspond to your the square footage of the living space that you're in, if there is a variety of different sizes of housing. And then, of course, I'm also a co-founder of the Housing Innovation Co-op, which, just to explain what we are a nonprofit, and our goal is to identify gaps in access to affordable and supportive housing, and then to do research and education to help address those gaps. So we are a research and education oriented organization. One of the things we're working on right now too is identifying what are the biggest challenges in people using co-ops and developing housing in rural communities in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and we've been thinking about looking at PEI, but we need a good connection in PEI. So if anybody knows one, please get in touch with me. My contact info for LinkedIn is in the chat. I think I would be very interested in hearing from this group, because we've recently been told by the Center for Housing Transformation, CHTC, that there's enough resources out there for rural communities, whether it's around co-ops or just developing housing, that there's enough resources and so on out there. Our understanding is there's a severe lack of understanding of how co-ops can be used to create housing, and in particular in rural communities. And there's a severe lack of capacity in rural communities to create housing. So yeah, just give me if that's about 5 minutes, Bob, that'll do for now.
That's very good, and left us a lot of openings there for some questions to follow up on what you were saying. And I think you should definitely follow up with David Daunton. Hello, David. He's on PEI, and I think the two of you would do well to meet each other. I'd like
if I can just mention one more quick thing, Bob. A significant thing that's driving housing development in Nova Scotia is the remedy case, human rights case around people living with disabilities and their right to choice in where they live, which includes rural communities. But there's a severe lack of supply and lack of variety of housing in rural communities to enable people living with disabilities and other communities to have a choice in where they live. So I'll just mention that as well as a significant factor for consideration in Nova Scotia.
Okay, thank you. Mark, I want to turn it over to you, give you some 5 minutes or so to tell us about Everbloom Homes and the innovative work that you're doing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robert, and to the Center for Local Prosperity for this opportunity to speak and share my story and allow me to help build awareness for the community interest company structure. That is quite new, and if you've never heard of it, that's okay, because most haven't. And a big part of my work is to build awareness around that. I've actually just crossed the country. I'm in BC right now, and a big part of this is to create more awareness across the country that this model is available as a new social enterprise option in our country. So I started in Newfoundland about 6 weeks ago, and I've covered a lot of ground since. And there's a lot of familiar faces on this call, so great to see you all. And so again, I'm the CEO and founder of Everbloom Homes CIC. I'm based out of Dartmouth, and the organization started as a property management company in 2019, and since then has evolved quite a bit as we were preparing to expand our business for acquisitions and development. We made a decision to focus on an affordable housing solution. And that's where we landed on the community interest company. So before really getting into the details of the business model, just speak to what community interest companies are a little bit. It was legislated in Nova Scotia officially in 2016 as a new corporate designation for social enterprises in the province. It actually originated in the UK back in 2004. So it's been in operation in the UK for over 20 years. In the UK, we now see over 36,000 CICs in operation. In Nova Scotia, we only have 12, despite it being around for 9 years. So I think that's just simply because it's not well known yet. And this was created in the UK as an option for social purpose organizations. So it's not just specific to housing, it's any organization that has a social mandate. And it really checked off a lot of boxes for us and very much aligned with the mission of our organization when we began our focus on affordable housing and community-based solutions. And what it allows us to do is operate very much like a private business. So very agile. We do not report to a board. So a lot of the strategic planning and so on is really in the hands of the founders to develop the business and how we operate. But it brings a lot of very, very innovative tools that bring together aspects of nonprofit and for-profit organizations. So on the nonprofit side, it's actually creating non-market assets. So under a CIC, there's something called an asset lock. And under the legislation and regulations in Nova Scotia, it stipulates that we can never sell our assets, in our case, our properties, to a private entity. So in that sense, it is truly non-market housing, and that's in perpetuity. So that is protected under legislation and under our business registration as well. But what I found really interesting about this model, and one of the biggest gaps I identified when doing a lot of my research around our business model and planning is the gap in financing in community housing and the high dependency on public funding. And there's only so much public money to go around, and it's quite competitive. So it's really constraining a lot of organizations from growing and scaling. And what a community interest company allows us to do is actually leverage a lot of conventional financing tools that are used in the private sector. So as a CIC, we can actually have shareholders, we can distribute dividends. So it allows us to really develop innovative financing and investment tools. So in a way, our model is very much emulating a private real estate firm, but holding the social mandates of community housing provider. Now within that, although we do have profit and we look at it as a surplus, we are mandated to reinvest 60% of our profits back into our community purpose. So for our purpose, that's to reinvest that back into our communities, into creating more affordable housing and ensuring that's high quality and meeting the community needs as well. Whereas that other 40%, we can leverage that. We can actually access the equity in our assets, leverage that to generate investment. So that investment in our case is really largely focusing on private capital, but as well as public capital. So this actually appeals to many, many sectors across private, public, and community sectors. So in our case, we're delivering on a public good, on a social mandate, but we also have the opportunity to provide returns on our investments, which attracts private markets as well. So it's really bringing together a lot of these different pieces and really creating a best of both worlds situation where we can leverage these tools that we've seen develop in the community housing sector, but as well as the tools that have developed in the private real estate sector over the years. And the private sector is challenged in their own ways now as well. So we see this as an opportunity to really present a new option for community housing in Canada. And again, that's a big part of my work now in building more awareness out of this. And I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to speak to the business a little further through our webinar here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. That's fascinating. It's first I've come across this, I've got to be honest, and I think that sort of mixed market financing approach, it's going to be fascinating to see if it gets some legs under it. I think it could really start to take off. Do put your questions in the chat box. I see there's a few of them starting to show up. That would be greatly appreciated. Hearing the three of you speak, I'm sensing some threads here. You've all mentioned affordability. That's, of course, a key topic these days. But also, Lynn, you mentioned it with the land trust, that the land is not on the open market anymore. It's held by the community in perpetuity, I think you said. And then Mark, you said there's an asset lock on any work that you would do so that it's not part of open real estate market, so to speak. So that seems to be, how does that tie in, that sort of removing property from a open real estate market? How does that tie in with affordability? Why do the two link together like that? I'll leave it up to you, Lynn, or Mark, or Lori. Any comments on that?
I have several comments on it. Given that with our, for example, the DownTheMarsh Community Land Trust, we actually had an advantage over some land trusts that are developing even across the country, in that there was land readily available to us, but we still had to buy it at below market value, which it has not been bought as of yet, because you still have to find funding or do fundraising or whatever to actually purchase the land. But once you purchase the land, then you can talk about offering it affordable structures to people in the community, but you can't do it unless you have land. Mm-hmm. And I'll stop there because I see another question asked about the barriers. So I'll save that for when you actually ask that chat question, because it's all connected.
It's all, I can see there's a whole lot of connections here in that regard. So Mark, you think there may be some financing, and this was a conversation that came up earlier when we talked, Lynn. It was all about financing, being able to secure the land and tie it down so that you can do a land trust. So Mark, is this something that would apply to land trusts, do you think?
That's a community interest companies. Yeah, well, really one of the biggest objectives I focused on from day one was how to protect affordability and perpetuity. And what I was seeing in the market, we've got stats to show that we're losing more affordable units than we're creating in the market right now. So I wanted to discover a tool that could allow us to protect that, but also still provide the tools to maintain its viability, its feasibility. And that really comes back to the financing aspect of it. So with that asset lock, it does allow us to protect that. And with our mandate to really appeal to the interests of both the public and private sector, we're really setting ourselves up to create investment from both streams to, one, bring down our costs on the capital in terms of developments, acquisitions, operations, but at the same time combining that with the private streams to provide competitive returns, potentially adjusted returns, but that provide high impact. So by combining those two streams, ultimately that's building into our financial modeling now on what can these political or these policy levers allow us to do in terms of creating more affordability while still creating attractive investment opportunities. And that's the key. It's a challenging market right now in private or community sectors, and really finding those levers that we can utilize long term to, one, create more cheaper, but also operate in a sustainable manner over the long term. So real estate and housing is a long-term game, and the financial modeling behind that is so critical. The CIC is new in Canada, so it's actually not even recognized by many entities at the moment. So part of our work right now is working with the federal government, CMHC specifically, to get it recognized as an entity within their financing programs and access to low-cost financing.
I can see you've got a big sales job ahead. Lori, you had your hand up, and
I just wanted to add. So I definitely, I'm familiar with CICs, community interest companies, and I know I think it's great that it's being explored as a new tool, but the practice of mixed market housing, so a mix of non-market and a mix of equity-based or for-market housing using the cooperative model, actually has been around a long time and used for a long time. It's actually considered best practice to have a mix of non-market and on-market or for-profit, nonprofit and for-profit housing. It's how you do that using different governance structures is what can be important to figure out, right? You might have a nonprofit housing co-op that's leasing land from a community land trust that is also a nonprofit housing co-op, or nonprofit co-op, for instance, is one structure you can use for CLTs. And then you could have a separate housing co-op that is equity-based, that is also leasing land. And then that way you get the benefit of the for-profit and a reasonable profit. We're talking about a modest return, not gouging returns, right? But a moderate return on equity-based housing that you might build to help subsidize the nonprofit housing. So this is actually a financial model that is not new. It's just not a lot of people know about it. And I think, and this is something I'd love to hear Lynn talk more about as well, is the capacity issue. This is one of the most significant challenges, I think, in rural communities, but I'd love to hear from anyone who might dispute this. And I think there's a severe challenge in this being recognized, is the amount of capacity, the amount of knowledge in rural communities. You have a lot of volunteers trying to help with the housing issue, trying to do the right thing, but they don't necessarily have organizational capacity with staff, the experience, the knowledge, and it's very, very challenging in rural communities. And yet this is not recognized as much as I think it should be as a key challenge.
Well,
So, Lynn,
yeah,
yes.
I think there's another scenario, because you talk about the nonprofit and the equity, and that being the ideal situation. Well, often in, for example, African Nova Scotian communities, neither model has been successful. And that being because you can't dismiss the whole issue of racism and marginalization, erasure, all these kinds of things that have impacted housing in for example, African Nova Scotian communities. So I remember in the beginning of the cooperative movement, when it was very strong, for example, in Nova Scotia, we were still not a part of that movement. We didn't have the resources. We didn't have all these things that you're talking about. Well, it's no different now, which is what I am really experiencing on my Down the Marsh project, is that we were at the point of folding up, even though we had very, very eager people, volunteers to want to do the work. When you come up against even mindsets, when you're working with a government that doesn't see African people as being able to do the job or warrant giving the resources to, or land, like all these different scenarios have a further impact on these communities, even within something like cooperative or community land trust. So if I can jump, because I know from the beginning I have to be careful about my timing, but I think we keep not jumping to that question about barriers. That I'm very happy they put that, because those barriers are there. And that's why also we talk about our land trust in terms of reparations, our land trust being a form of trying to deal with reparations that relate back to the transatlantic slave trade and all the things that we've missed out on and do not have. You can't do any of these housing projects without taking that into consideration. And then you talk about barriers around, like you say, I tried to get a bookkeeper, for example, on our project. It's not that we didn't have bookkeepers that had been trained, but the few we had left the rural area and went into the city. And we didn't have bookkeepers. And we're trying to do an African-based land trust, but it's not possible to do that. But we also have to have each one teach one as a part of it. As we bring in the wider community, you can't just come into our community again and you have all the expertise and all the training and what have you. You got to come in and help train and develop the people, that the expertise or whatever that we don't have. So there's several barriers that we're facing right now. They're critical barriers. It's not because we can't do land trust or we don't have the will or the volunteers don't want, but if government and others don't take these issues into consideration, we are once again doomed to failure.
Wow, Lynn. So I can see there's a lot of layered complexity and just in terms of the barriers, racism, um, just to begin with, but then also professional capacity. How do you get people that, not just bookkeepers, but people that know where the money is, government programs? That's a whole complicated, right there in itself, I would think. And you got to be able to secure the land, to really be able to move forward, and all the legal aspects, I would think. So,
if I could just speak to that for a minute, Bob. Totally agree with everything Lynn just said. And I'm really glad she's here because I think those are extremely important points to make. And also from another population's perspective, because I'm a person who lives with a disability, and I've done a lot of work recently around housing and people living with disabilities, and really understanding the importance of an intersectional lens, right? So looking at class, looking at race, looking at ableism, all these things. And then this concept of, nothing about us without us, right? That we need to build capacity, one, in rural communities, because you don't have as many large organizations. It's often a lot of volunteers trying to create housing in rural communities. But then you have these additional layers of challenge. If you're looking to include or involve, or often people who are from marginalized communities in some way, or have extra challenges and issues that go on, are not included in trying to build the capacity, or trying to make sure that they're able to be engaged as much as they should be. So, and that goes for many communities who are often marginalized in some way, but we also need to remember to look at things from an intersectional lens.
Yeah. No, this is, I'm beginning to, this has been quite a learning curve for me, I have to say, of how much of a tough nut to crack this whole housing market is, affordability in particular. And Mark, I'm coming towards you with a question here. It strikes me that the three of you are leaning against traditional real estate development and kind of upmarket housing, where you've got developers, all they want to do is max out their profit. So that's why you see a lot of gentrification in urban areas and almost nothing going on in rural areas. And then homeowners, they're just interested in capital gains, and being able to maybe at some point sell for more than they bought it for. So that's kind of the mindset that we grew up in this culture, and the three of you are really leaning against this. So, Mark, I'm curious that you could potentially be sitting on something very powerful if you can do this mixed market financing and find your way in between those two, ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, and I just to kind of pick up on the discussion around capacity development, I'm hearing a lot of discussion now in the community housing sector around diversification of revenue streams, and again, removing that entire dependency on public funding. So there's a real focus on how to utilize social enterprise to build capacity within organizations and think about how we can use that to really deliver on our mission and our purpose. But just to kind of speak to the broader spectrum of the housing market right now, it's yes, the private industry is really largely focused on profits, yes, but the reality is the market's not doing very well right now. If we look at Toronto, for example, the condo market, which has been in place now, just soaring for the last 20 years, is on the brink of a crash. So these are models that have been in place now for 20 years that are no longer working. So the discussion's actually changing in the private market as well, and considering new integrated approaches. and seeing the importance of a balanced market to, one, continue delivering on their profits to their shareholders, but two, maintain a market that's delivering for our customers. So if I look at the Toronto condo market, we've got a lot of these small single condo buildings that aren't conducive to families. And we're seeing that in new builds and buildings in Nova Scotia and Halifax as well. We're not serving the full community. And that creates risk in the market. And we're seeing that. So real estate's a bit of a boom and bust right now. And if we look at models around the world, in Europe, for example, we see a higher level of sustainability that takes a long-term vision and really understands that broader market approach. And Canada right now is way behind other developed countries in terms of our non-market housing stock. If we look at the UK, for example, they're approximately 12%. We look at Austria, they're about 25%. We look at places like the Netherlands, they're well over 40% non-market housing in their stock. So if we look at those markets, by actually creating more non-market housing stock, we're providing balance of affordability, because then the private sector is actually competing with our lower rents. So that's a bit of a more of a macroeconomic spectrum in there, but really that's what I'm bringing forward with the CIC, is to provide that middle ground approach, while facilitating that discussion across private, community, and public sectors to understand that balance needs to be built in the broader housing market, and we all need to work together to get there. It's a win-win for all, and that's really our goal.
Interesting. And it's really helpful to see what's going on in other countries, and bringing that as a lens into what's happening here. Really important. There is a question in the chat box for you, Mark, about as a CIC, you have to reinvest 60% of your profits. So where do you see that going?
And yeah, so our philosophy is really that the home is the basis of society. And this actually leans into an old ancient Greek concept called ecos. And the basis of ecos in ancient Greek society was the home was really the fundamental driver of economy. And the word economy actually comes from ecos, eco, and onomy means management. So it actually, the root means home management. So the word economy itself actually goes back to the home system that was developed in ancient Greek culture about 2,500 years ago. So that's really embedded in our business philosophy, our structure, and our reinvestment will be in community. So that can be a broad spectrum of where that money is reinvestment, but really the home provides the foundation to deliver community services. So in our case, we'll partner with nonprofit organizations, community service organizations, to ensure when we start planning, designing a new building, or building a new community, those organizations are involved in that process. So that investment goes into that building to make sure it's purpose built, meaning the community needs, and that when we open the doors, it's really fit for purpose as well to deliver those services and support those local organizations. So it is part of our financial modeling right now and how we utilize that 60% reinvestment. But this is a bit of a broader understanding of regenerative financing, and regenerative real estate is a very growing discipline as well across the world. And that regeneration is understanding how we reinvest some of those profits and surpluses back into that sustainability of long term. So there's not necessarily one specific area we'll reinvest that. And that's right now we're developing that impact measurement model on how do we report that back to our investors. So our investors are not necessarily looking for just financial returns. They want to see impact in our communities through the homes we're building. But ultimately, through stronger communities, we're building stronger economies as well. And I think that's a big conversation in Canada widely now as well, is strengthen the economy, productivity. So there's many, many measures we can take, but we want to make sure we're accountable and measuring that and reporting that back to investors.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, and thank you for invoking ecos, not just economy, but also ecology, the loss of nature, so to speak. I think that's a beautiful connection there. We at Center for Local Prosperity, we try to cast a broad lens, a radar screen, if you will, on all things localization. So that's why we're doing this housing approach. Another example, I think, of a CIC, a variation on that that's somewhat unique, particularly in Canada and in Nova Scotia, Across Mi'kma'ki are Indigenous community-owned businesses. So it's the community itself that owns the business, and that's a very interesting model that I think we're starting to see play out quite a promising way here. So Liv, how does it look in the chat box in terms of questions?
We've got a question from Paul. Paul's got a question for any of the panelists, and it's an action-oriented question. He's wondering what some examples might be of practical things that we can do to make a positive difference for our future. So maybe housing-oriented examples.
So jump in, any of each of you.
Yeah, go ahead, Lynn.
And then, Paul, I'm going around your question for a second. I had my hand up. You didn't see because I have a question too. And because it comes to me often. As people learn, for example, about the Community Land Trust, I have people literally knocking on my door saying, I'm interested, I want a home. They think they're going to get a home today or tomorrow. And that's the only opportunity. It's for Black people. It's going to be below market value. And of course, it's not going to happen. And I ran across a person this past week. They are a couple. They have, I think it's 7 children. They're still in public housing. They had gone to the bank to see if they could get money for housing. They were refused and said, well, your credit rating is not the best, because they had 7 kids, so trying to make it through on a low income. And they cleaned up their credit rating, and then they're either usually a little bit above the level to get housing, even with 7 kids. And they came to me to help. And so I'm wondering, since we're talking about housing, do we have a handle on where someone like that today can access housing? What is their option? And it relates to Paul's question about things that practical things we can do to and that's a really hard question. It seems really simple, but I'd say it's very difficult, because here I have the question being asked of me, who's in the housing field. I can easily say, well, join our board and help us and volunteer and what have you. But where really is it, besides maybe starting groups who don't even have a clue about how do we do social justice kinds of initiatives. So I'm not answering your question, Paul, completely, but I have the same question being asked of me, and don't always have the answers.
Yeah, so if I can jump in with a couple of things. So at the Housing Innovation Co-op, one of the gaps we've identified is challenges in competing with the for-profit market for land, and in particular in urban context, but also very much so in rural. And a lot of the suggestions when it comes to community groups, whether volunteers or more organized, is we'll fundraise or look for surplus land. And this is a significant barrier, because you must have a purchase and sale agreement, or you must own land in order to secure pre-development money. And there's very little community money or government money even to purchase land directly, or private money to purchase land without building something on it and being able to secure a mortgage. So one of the things we've been looking at, and there are resources and things out there, but I find they're very high level. They're not so like the CADCO building course out of Ontario, which I've been through, I think is at a very high level. And that's not necessarily, we need to meet people where they're at and help them understand what tools and resources already exist that they can start to use, and more innovative ways in particular in securing land. So I just want to mention, for instance, Nova Scotia was the first province to create a community economic development investment fund, or CEDIF. And now many other provinces have this tool. Now, the issue with the CEDIF is there's no support within government to learn how to use it to bring together investment within community, local investment, to be able to use it in different ways. Farmworks has been very successful, but it's really on the volunteers to learn how to use this tool. However, Ryan Gibson is on this call, I notice as well. And Ryan did a great session presenting on some research, and correct me if I get this wrong, Ryan, but that the tax credit that's part of a CEDIP is not necessarily the main driver of why people invest. So a much simpler model of investment can be an investment cooperative where people are able to invest money. They can expect a reasonable rate of return, and it could be designed to be patient money. So you leave it in there for 3 to 5 years, similar to a CEDIP, but you don't worry about the tax credit component, because that's what makes creating a CEDIP extremely complicated. Whereas you can create an investment co-op from people in your community who just want to help with the housing issue, and they want to be involved in some way, and they would like some moderate return on their investment. So this is a practical tool, alternative way of finding money to be able to secure land, to then be able to go to the next step of getting pre-development money and that sort of thing. And I'll just mention a quick mention on surplus. So when people say community groups, well, you just have to fundraise, I think that's very naive, and I think it's very slow, and I don't think it's innovative. So, similar to some of the things that Mark is saying, we need to find new ways, and we have to support people learning the skills to find new ways to find money to compete, because unfortunately that's the reality. We have to compete with the for-profit world for land to be able to build housing. And on surplus land is not necessarily the answer either, because it's not always good land. And by surplus, this is usually government-owned land. It's not always good land. It often has some geographical challenges or something like that. It's not necessarily close to a community. It's not necessarily within active transportation or any kind of transportation distance. And so that's not necessarily an answer either. Again, I think that's very naive. So we really do need to look at new models of financing and ways of teaching people in community how they can go through the land, the securing of land and the pre-development and all these things that you have to do for housing, how we can make that much simpler and easier and quicker for people to do, in particular in rural communities.
On the idea of competing, I don't think we necessarily do have to compete, because we haven't. There is models where people have joined together, like voluntary associations, community groups, with the developers to the benefit of both. But we've been taught that we have totally different, because we might have totally different goals and aspirations or whatever, it can't be done. And maybe it can be done. And there are models where it has been. And that's one area we're not looking at. How can we're both in the housing market and what have you. Why can't we work together to get what each other wants? I mean, but again, I'm more back to this whole issue of Paul's original question too, is what do we do today? Like, what do we do today to not make this seem so not negative, but that it's this long-term thing that's way down the road when people are saying we need housing today.
If I could just add to that in terms of what we can do, I know we're getting close. I'll keep this short, Robert, but There's an area in Canada that's really starting to develop around sustainable finance, social finance. It's still in its infancy, but it's well developed in other countries in the world. And it really looks at the broader spectrum of folks like ourselves on our column, where our money goes in our investments, such as an RSP. And somebody shared a stat with me recently that one of our biggest exports in Atlantic Canada is our money. So when we look at that, all the hundreds of millions that go into RSPs every year in Atlantic Canada, actually only 2% of that comes back to Atlantic Canada investment. Really think about where your money is going, your investments. There are new financing tools and options becoming available, but financing is very complex, and often we rely on our financial advisors and so on. But to Lori's point as well, I mean, there's options within co-ops for investment. There's going to be options within CICs for investment. We've got community bonds that are popping up all over the country. So there are new options. But I think it just starts with that question: ask where your money is invested and what impact that is having in your community.
Yeah.
But they make everybody so afraid. For example, I belonged to two CEDFs from the beginning, and then catching. But the financial advisor totally was against joining a CEDF, and it took me to say it's my money, kind of thing. And one of those two is still going. I'm still involved. One totally folded, no support, no whatever, and this negative idea. So I agree, we need to look at where we're investing our money, but there's not enough government or private initiatives to say these same statistics that you're quoting, 2%, the general public doesn't know that to begin with, and there's nobody out there pushing it. So they don't have their heart. They just want to make money off their money kind of thing. But I agree with you. Look where your money's going.
And somebody else I heard say recently, it's not a money problem. There's lots of money in this country. It's a plumbing problem. We just don't have the pipes to get where it needs to go. So it's awareness, it's education. It takes time, but those tools need to be in place to help us get the money where it needs to be.
You know, we've got more questions in the chat box. We are starting to run out of time. I'm not quite sure how much more we can squeeze in. Do you see what might be a short question in there, Liv?
I'll read Erica's question. I think we probably only have room for this one more, maybe. Erica's wondering if any of you have thoughts on if or how the philanthropic sector can leverage the resources needed to overcome some of the intersectional barriers, especially in support of African Nova Scotian communities who were not able to accrue intergenerational wealth.
Could you repeat the beginning of the question?
Yep. Erica's wondering if any of you have thoughts about how or if the philanthropic sector can leverage the resources needed to overcome some of those intersectional barriers.
So the philanthropic sector, how can they play in and help?
I think that offering their expertise in terms of what they can do to the community, where we've been most successful has been when people have said, oh, you have a problem. What can we offer to help you? And we've sat down and I've said, I need this, and this. And they said, leave it with me. Let me go away. And they may say, I can't give you all of this, but I can give you this. And that has been the most successful way. In fact, I had one this week regarding my bookkeeping.
So it sounds like the voice of experience is just bringing that expertise into the room is really extremely valuable.
Sometimes we don't know what you do or what you can offer, and you actually have to tell us, so we don't even know to go to you.
Yeah, no, that's an important one. And what skills and assets can be brought to bear there? I want to cover a little bit of ground here. Speaking, Lynn, of community land trusts, I know that you're a keynote speaker coming up soon here. This is the Community Land Trust Summit of all of Canada, being hosted in Halifax, the third annual, from September 11th to the 14th. And Liv, I think you may have been put a link in the chat box for that one. So
Yep, I'll
that's
drop
downtown Halifax. Lynn, you're going to be up on the stage, it sounds like. That's fantastic. And I know there's going to be a number of site visits before and after that event. I do want to also say we've covered an enormous amount of ground here today. We left a lot untouched. These are deep and broad subjects, and that's part of CLP's mandate is, I think, going forward into the future, really trying to flush these out. More about land trusts. We want to get into CICs, CDIFs, investment co-ops, all of the kind of funding models. And really play around with all of that because I think it's, and again, that thread, as I said at the very beginning of this webinar, it's all about cooperation. And I think that's what brings it all together. So in coming months here, do sign up on our newsletter. By the way, you can do that on our website. You'll be fully informed. Next month is August. Of course, it's summertime and it's August, so we're going to pause on the webinar. But then we pick up the thread again in September. We have a special guest, Justin Cantafio, who is the executive director for the farmers markets in Nova Scotia. And he'll be talking about farmers markets in Nova Scotia, but bringing an international lens to that because he had a scholarship funding to really travel around the world and look at localized food and markets from a whole range of perspectives. So I think that's going to be a fascinating one on localizing food supplies in September. That's the 25th. On October 30th, we're going to be getting into the local procurement. So this is institutional procurement. How can they juice up their local economy by spending their money locally? These are big institutions. They spend tens of millions, hundreds of millions every year because they have to. And how much of that can they redirect locally? It's a little bit like the pension funds you mentioned, Mark. How can we get another 10% into local economies? So that's just a little bit of a feeler going forward. There's a lot of valuable information and links in the chat box. If people don't know how to save the chat, this is the time. You open your chat box, of course. There's 3 little dots in the upper right-hand corner and a little